Hello everyone and welcome to this very special webinar hosted by PM Today in partnership with the very wonderful ProSymmetry. My name's Amy Hatton, I'm the Associate Editor of PM Today and I'm delighted to be hosting this very special webinar, 5 practical, powerful strategies to adapt to current skills shortages. I've got with me today the fantastic Sean Pales and Greg Bailey of ProSymmetry, both very good colleagues and dear friends of mine. It's really great, guys, to be working with you again. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Fantastic, Amy. Another great day. We're excited to be here with you.
And Sean, how's life treating you? I'm hoping that you're enjoying some better climates than ours. I'm just judging from the photo on your opening slide that you're both out somewhere exotic, or are you leading us down the garden path?
Well, I'm in exotic Cleveland, Ohio, but things are well and happy to be here.
Well, it's fantastic to have you both with us today. We're here today to talk predominantly about resource portfolio management. We've got a lot to get through, and this is going to be, we hope, a really lively, chatty session. But before we do that, if I can ask Greg to perhaps move on to the obligatory housekeeping slide. We all know this one. So just a few notes for you. The webinar is being recorded. We are live, guys, so technical hitches do happen. We have a great tech support team in the background. If we do have any difficulties, we'll keep you informed, and please do stick with us while we get those sorted out. Nonetheless, the webinar will be being recorded and we will be emailing a copy to all of you as delegates after the session. There will be plenty of time to quiz Greg and Sean at the end of the session on their extensive PMO and resource portfolio management knowledge. You can pop questions through at any time using the Q&A function, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the session. And obviously, if you have any technical difficulties, you can use the chat function to communicate directly with our tech support team, and they will do their best to help you. Okay. Let's get started. So we're talking today about resource portfolio management and the skills shortage. We're going to take a look first at a slide to set the scene. And I think what we're going to do, Greg, is we're going to just talk to you a little bit about what you guys are hearing on the grapevine in the world of resource management. I mean, it's not uncommon knowledge that Gartner have released reports as late as February this year, really highlighting the impending skills shortage, which is really starting to bite now, I think, especially in obviously the light of the last year and a half, where we've seen hiring being frozen. People have obviously had a lot of working challenges during the pandemic. What are you hearing? What's the latest on the grapevine from your clients about the pain points that they're facing? Greg, do you perhaps want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple of general comments, and then I'll kind of walk through the Gartner hype cycle a little bit. So I think as we're all seeing, at least today, the pandemic has impacted a lot of areas in a lot of various companies. You know, with people having to move, you know, home work, you know, has made a big difference. I think a lot of employees in general are rethinking, you know, are they passionate about where they're working? You know, are there other locations they want to live where they can work? So I think in general, I think we all sort of feel this, you know, kind of change that's taken place with employees working at companies. I think we definitely know that there's been a challenge in some industries where actually their workload is increased. So, you know, we've had clients where they've got so much work coming in that they're having to, you know, find additional contractors, additional employees. Some of them are large engineering companies, you know, globally, where they're having a difficult time, right? So that you know, we see that as well. I think when we think about what the biggest challenge and where we actually have just boomed during this pandemic, you know, I'm not saying that's a good, but, you know, good for us, is people are the most expensive resource, right, within an organization. So the challenge has become is people have had to say, we really got to focus on this resource management. If I think about this Gartner hype cycle report here, what we've seen in the past is that there's been a huge excitement about getting PPM tools in place, and, you know, let's look at agile tools and all this other stuff. So, you know, even Gartner talks about the fact that there's a lot of hype getting that in place. And a lot of clients have been doing it. PMOs are putting it in. Nothing wrong with that at all. But there traditionally has been like a massive disillusionment in trying to leverage that for resource capacity planning. And so even when I think about some of our existing clients, and we did a survey recently at a big webcast I did for another big PM industry group, literally 63% of the clients were using Excel. People were still using Excel, even though 53% of them had some kind of a PPM tool in place. So just imagine you now have to focus more on resource management than you ever did before, and you're still using Excel. And I'm sure a lot of clients or a lot of people that are on this call are in that same boat. So to get back to this, there's a huge excitement factor, but again, the big disillusionment where you look at where resource management shows up on this Gartner hype cycle. Maybe it's not as exciting because it's been so difficult to get into place or implement. That's where we're going to talk about some strategies today. But the value that you get in the long term is just, you get the value way quicker. And we just saw that, I think, with our clients having to implement and get those systems in place. I don't know if, Sean, you have any additional comments or thoughts that you might have.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking more broadly about the market itself, I think it reflects what we see with a lot of our clients, and it's a traditional supply-demand type of issue. So demand for highly specialized skills and roles has really obviously exceeded supply, both within organizations and globally. And one of the key issues we have is that what was previously regional competitiveness for skills and roles and competencies grew to sort of super regional competition and is increasingly global. And for larger global organizations, you nod your head and go, yes, I know. But what's really changed has been that a lot of smaller organizations have been able to move up in the market. And with the growth in tools and services and providers that make accessible what was previously inaccessible to them, which is the global workforce, global talent supply, things have gotten even tighter and more competitive. So I think we have two things playing a role, at least from that perspective. One being more tools to help supply more firms with access to a limited set of qualified resources. And then, of course, you have the whole COVID thing, which I think gets more credit than it deserves to some of the resource management challenges, but it's reinforced the work from anywhere approach. So smaller firms that previously would not engage global workforce are now doing so. So I think those are a few of the drivers playing a role in some of the challenges for acquiring very concentrated core skills needed for growth in the modern era.
Sure. And I think one of the big messages that I'm hearing from you there, and it certainly resonates in the UK and European market as well, is that the kind of convergence of different factors that have come together here that you've talked about mean that this is very much a market that's being driven by the talent, by the employees, by the resources, as you rightly say. They're making the choices. They're recognizing that that they have the power to carve out their career as they wish to. And in a sense, it's the employer's responsibility to ensure that they're delivering those opportunities. I think that takes us on to some of the typical pain points that we see in resource management. So we've got a slide illustrating that. I would be interested to know from you guys how many of these are kind of typically resonate with your clients. I'm sure that some of our audience are looking at these thinking, yeah, we recognize these, definitely. So just talk us through a few of these pain points and sort of how they're manifesting in reality.
Yeah, and so by the way, just make a comment. Any spelling errors are all my errors on this slide. So I was kind of in the final review on it.
We're marking you down, Greg. We're marking you down.
Exactly, mark me down. Well, if that's the least I get today, I'm okay.
I think it's the go-to webinar. I think it's the way it displays, cuts out some of the.
Yeah. That'll be it.
Exactly. Go-to webinar did it. So I think we all know, right? We, whatever kind of company that is, and I didn't really get a chance to look at who we've got on the call here, but whether you're a bank, manufacturing company, whatever kind of organization you are, right? We're here to deliver whatever it is. We're either, when we look at our strategies the companies deploy, we're looking to improve market share, we're looking to supply, solar energy, whatever our strategy is as a company that we're doing, right? And generally, there's a whole lot of projects that we have to do in order to achieve those strategies or goals as a company. And I think when we look at the fact that I've seen so many companies, and some of you on this call may be familiar with it, the demand ends up getting thrown at you, and nobody ever looks at, well, do we have the people available to actually deliver on that work? Or the PM or the PMO tries to do that, but it's really something that's not done as efficiently as possible. So, if you don't look at the resources that are available to deliver on that work, that's just kind of the first bottleneck you're going to get all the way around. So I think, a couple of different things we've run across at various organizations around these scenarios that come up, and I know Sean has got a few more, but a lot of it, even if we think about COVID or even pre-COVID, again, like Sean mentioned, a lot of the stuff we're talking about was pre-COVID. When can we slot work in? Where do we have skill shortages where we need to hire? And I'll talk more about this a little bit, Sean and I will, around skills management and, how do we ensure we've got employee engagement and stuff. But I don't know if you have anything that you might have wanted to add on this, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about here. I mean, in my opinion, really the link is just pure between strategy and resourcing. And, we're working on a lot of things around predictive analytics and a new product launch we'll probably touch on a bit later, using resources to really gauge the riskiness of your portfolio. And in effect, can you achieve the strategy you're embarking upon? There's so much insight that can be gained from the resourcing side. But the common questions we see here for organizations involve, what can we achieve against what we're currently planning? How realistic are our plans? A lot of the same questions they have from a road mapping perspective come up quite routinely. Many of our very large clients that will manage anywhere from 10 to 100,000 resources are in high-tech industries, many of them in things like R&D, chip manufacturing, chip fabrication, things like that. And often they'll ask questions that they either know they're going to be asked by management or are asked and need to respond to quickly. Things around, I have demand for this type of work or these types of projects to drive strategy globally for the organization. But of course, we have limited supply. One common case that always pops up to mind that I hear quite routinely is we need a certain number of, let's say, design engineers and fabrication and verification engineers, and those might be concentrated in certain regions globally, and demand for them is universal. What is the effect if we were to shift that demand into different regions? Maybe there's some geopolitical impact, some currency issue. Maybe we're exiting certain markets, we're acquiring certain businesses. Can we shift the demand across our business to different regions using what-if analysis and using our resource management data? So these are real-world scenarios affecting billions and billions of dollars worth of commerce, and whether it's R&D, product development, IT governance, marketing, construction, and so on. And it's really all driven from that resourcing side of the equation.
Well, and I think, hearing you talk, Sean, about the shift in demand obviously leads into the whole area that any PMO or PPM professional will be familiar with. And that, of course, is this big move from traditional waterfall methodologies into more agile techniques. I think it's fair to say that as an industry, we're recognizing the value of agile. It can be tricky to manage, especially the larger the company, the more resources you're looking at. And particularly, obviously, in the last year, things have by necessity, do forgive me, have had to become more agile. But I'm guessing there's a lot of opportunity here as well to perhaps rethink or re-envisage the way that you look at the organization and its resources. And I know that you guys have this concept of a purposeful organization. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Obviously a lot of companies are moving towards safe and agile and doing team-based resource planning. But in many cases, as we all know, unless you are just absolutely the perfect organization, people still get pulled off on other work. So again, nothing wrong with that strategy, but I do think we're still seeing a big issue with resources getting pulled from one thing to another, regardless of the technique or methodology you're using for planning. And, you know, one of the things that I've seen, and this I actually got from a presentation that Lonza, large pharma in Switzerland and Germany, presented at one of our user conferences, said is that, you know, this one of the successes they've had, so here's kind of a best practice, take it for what you will, is, you know, in a lot of cases, we always try to allocate our resources to say 95%. And then we say, okay, let's allocate 5% to business as usual. Now, I do know some of you on this call probably, I was talking to a client yesterday where literally, you know, they plan 65% BAU work, business as usual, keep the lights on, and the rest is just project work. But when we allocate the teams or we allocate the people at too high of a level, we actually get less productivity than if we would allocate a little bit less. And I mentioned this in the interview I did with Amy that was presented and is out on the PM Today website. If you picture a freeway, and, you know, the freeway is got, you know, if you live in Los Angeles or London or some of the big cities, Cleveland, you all know they're jam-packed, right? Both sides of the freeway are full. Now, you could say they're fully allocated. In fact, you could say even if it was 95% allocated, but what generally happens? You got a lot of roadblocks. Things slow down. You're not moving very fast. Things aren't very smooth. But if you say allocated 75% of that road, right? So just imagine in your mind the traffic kind of moving smoother. And so it's sort of the opposite. Yeah, you're fully allocated, but you're not getting as much done or moving as fast as if you actually allocated less. So, you know, one of the techniques maybe just to think a little bit more about, you know, are you allocating people to too many things? And also ensure that we're not allocating people to too much stuff at one time. And we see that a lot with task shifting, right? So, you know, if you allocate somebody to 5 different things, you know, they're working on one thing, then they go work on another thing, then they got to come back to that. You forget your groove, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, live examples. Let's say I've got to write some documentation or white paper, which really I don't do very often anyways. Donna Fitzgerald, who works here, who is the lead Gartner analyst for 10 years. She does a lot of that writing, and Sean. So, but let's say I did have to write something. Well, immediately I'm hearing the bings on my email and I'm going to look at my email. Well, now I got to come back and do this again. But now I have 3 other emails I'm reading. So by all this task shifting, I'm not as effective as if you know, if I said, hey, okay, here's the 2 things I have to work on. So I think also not scheduling too much detail. So no more than a half of an FTE. So just plan at that level. Don't go any lower level of detail than that. And a lot of our clients are not doing that anyways. They're doing one FTE, you know, work on this. Now there are some industries where you're down at that weed level, but in general, just keeping it at that high level. So and not allocating as much. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one, Sean, or I can kind of move on after that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton I would add. I mean, adding on to that analogy is just thinking also about switching lanes or exiting the highway, you know, especially around the area of like context switching. But, you know, this gets back to, and I'll kind of dovetail into like risk management from a portfolio perspective and strategy execution. And it's amazing how much you can identify, and we'll have more to share on that in the coming months, how much you can predict your success and likelihood of achieving your strategic objectives by looking at these resource-centric metrics, things like not just allocation percentages, but assignment concurrency, flow rates, that traffic pattern analogy Greg was using, skill and role deficiencies, unallocated work. So if you're planning using, many people call them generics, I call them demand planning, represent demand for something, but you don't know who's going to do it yet. It's amazing how many organizations do that type of planning, near-term, mid-term, long-term, but don't actually see, do I even have people that can do this? And even if I do, what else are they on? They're not just sitting around. So looking at all of those factors, and there's a few others, you can come up with a pretty amazing level of insight and predict levels of success, both near-term, mid-term, long-term. And those need to be critical aspects of anyone managing a portfolio. And it all starts with and ends with the resourcing side of the equation. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's all about resources.
No, not at all, not at all. I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And just as an aside, guys, just so you know, in the UK, we share your pain when it comes to the state of our roads and the state of the traffic on them, but that's another conversation. Let's move on to the next couple of slides, which I think give us a real snapshot of how this looks in reality, both from the point of view of the organisation and the people in it, and then from the point of view of perhaps the more operational portfolio related side. Take us through it.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we've really been hearing and focusing on a lot is that it's not just a function of, hey, I'm going to assign these people to this work and, they just have to get the work done. They're really, if you think about it, we're all people, right? And again, that's a dumb statement, I know, but, we really want to feel like we're engaged in our work. So, if you think about your organization, you're always going to have a subset of people that, really just aren't engaged. They don't like the work. They're not happy to be there. They think they're better than everybody else. And so you're always going to have that percentage of employees. You'll definitely have that percentage of employees that love what they're doing. They're working hard, they're cranking, they really enjoy being a part of the team and all that. And then you got another percentage of your organization where really they're kind of just moving on. They're getting ready to leave, and they're probably already kind of out the door mind-wise. One of the things we found is that if we improve on this resource capacity planning, you can really increase that employee satisfaction, because you're enabling employees now to actually feel like their input matters. So one of the things that we've seen is that with all this remote work, right? So we've all talked agile, and let's make sure everybody's able to be agile and give their ideas and all that on that when they're managing the work and the projects. But I've also seen some increased governance in organizations. So in other words, way more meetings, right? Because the employers have felt like, hey, you're not in the office, so now we've got to have way more meetings than we had before. And so we're actually seeing where, you wanted your organization agile, but now you've just added a whole bunch more governance on than maybe you thought. So there are cases where that's been an impact for some employees that have, that really like that agile. In other cases, we've seen where folks now are really rethinking what skills they've got and what they would like to do in the organization, but the employers have no way to know what that employee would like to do, or no way to know what the skills are. So we're actually seeing, and we've been working with a lot of HR groups within some of the large corporations we deal with now, and they're not just looking at, Greg's a PM, or Sean's a CFO or a CEO, or this person is this or this person is that. They're actually trying to get a more detailed skills library built out. And in some cases, they're letting the employees actually log in, get a large engineering construction firm where, in that case, 9,000 employees will log in, and actually there's certain sections where they'll enter, well, here's the skills I've got that you probably didn't know about, and here's the skills I'd like to learn. So obviously some of that is in the HR systems that companies have, but it's not as much detailed as they'd like to have. So I think when we start looking about resource management, it's easy to just talk about, we need people, we need skills working on stuff, but it really is about the people. And if we do this, it will help folks feel like they're more engaged. They're going to feel like they don't have to go find another job. They're going to feel like they don't have to go somewhere else. And I think, we're seeing that. And Donna's talked about this, and a lot of her, if you go to our website, Donna's blogs talks about this quite a bit, sort of that softer side of the resource planning. More and more organizations are really looking at that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we all call this the softer side of resource management and management generally, really. But I mean, in my experience, it's the absolute core of success in everything you do. You can have as many systems, frameworks, methodologies as you like, but if you haven't got your people on board, motivated, doing what they're doing. And I love this idea of two-way data input where employees are actually able to get involved with this process and to take some accountability for their own career development, but to do it in a streamlined way. So let's have a look at how this kind of looks in terms of the structure of it. If we pop onto the next slide, I think we're going to start seeing some examples of the flow of how this works.
So I think, and this will be fairly familiar with a lot of folks here, and some will call this, demand management. We've got a workflow, we have a process. Now this is regardless of whether we're doing agile or whatever kind of technique we're using, but there's all kinds of ideas that are coming into the organization, right? So this is where all those requests are coming in for all the various work that has to be done, or projects or audits or whatever it is, or products that we're delivering on. So, when we start looking at this, and a lot of times what we'll see is this process flow gets short-circuited. We kind of immediately goes from, here's all our ideas, let's jump into portfolio evaluation and let's jump into prioritization, right? Well, you're kind of missing the fact it's great that you prioritize all these things, but if you don't have any kind of people available to deliver on this, then really, you're not gonna, great, that's priority one, but you got nobody that can deliver on it. So one of the things we start thinking about is, if you can start even doing just a high level resource planning just to start, even if it's just generic resources and by FTE, that's a good start. Now, many of you, that's one of the reasons people use Excel, right? Is because they're not going to be down to that weeds task management at this point. It's resource planning. Could be by generics, could be by team. Hey, I've got team. But again, the team is made up of people, right? So I don't care if you're working on sprints. I don't care what you're working on. It's still a certain number of staff you got to have to staff those teams if you're doing agile. So I'm going to kind of stop here and just see if Sean's got some additional to take us to the end of this here, or any other thoughts on this.
Greg, I don't have it on this one, so if you want to just move forward.
No, fantastic. So I think when we get into this, right, we all know, and in many cases, these could all be different workflows, right? You could have a workflow where, I've got new ideas come in. I could have a workflow that might be different. One of the things that to get on product yet is that we give you the ability to develop a lot of different workflows based on how ideas are coming into the cycle. But again, I think the key takeaway here is, do some high level FTE and then be able to do a lot of the what if scenario planning and portfolio analysis. That's, I think, is real critical here.
Sure. And I think you're going to move on and show us. It's kind of an interesting approach, Greg, because this is what it struck me when I interviewed you for the article we've recently published. Is it's in a sense you're going against the grain by advocating, less resource, not more. Allow some breathing space. Start with the very top level stuff. Don't get into the details straight away. If we just whiz through a couple of the slides that show us that, and then we'll get on to the more kind of meaty question of perhaps communicating this to your sponsors, your executives, your teams, etc., etc.
No, you bet. And I think this kind of, dovetailing from this into this, right? It really talks about how do we do that initial resource planning? And again, how do we make sure that we don't have bottlenecks with the right people? Now, again, this will vary on industry. We've seen this in our semiconductor clients. We've seen this in our pharma, banking, a lot of our, even our government clients, that we work with. We see that there's a need to be able to take our work, all the ideas coming in, and yes, you're going to sequence that work on when you can prioritize it, what's the most important, but how do we start aligning the people to that work, as well as saying, okay, here's where we're going to have gaps in the future, and how do we either move work around, or how do we slot new resources based on new hires, to be hires that we have to do there. So the other thing is, as we all know, many of you on this call are in the PMO, and in many cases, probably most, you don't actually own the people. So a lot of times you're requesting these people from resource managers. So how do you simplify that resource request process where you're able to say, okay, yeah, you're giving me this responsibility to deliver on this work. If you're not giving me the people to deliver on it, then I'm going to be missing my deliverables. And so, you know, there needs to be a really clear way that you can communicate with that PM and resource management team.
Sure, sure. And I think we can illustrate that moving onto the next slide, where we're starting to get into the kind of nitty gritty of how this looks from a technology enterprise management perspective.
You bet. And I'll just do a couple quick things here, and then Sean, if you have anything. So, you know, when we look at the people, so that's really the resource pool. We have people. Now, I would say most folks at this point generally are at least tracking some kind of base attributes about the people. So, you know, Greg is a PM. Greg is in this department. Greg is in this country. Greg is whatever, right? So usually I see where you've got these basic attributes. Fantastic. You should, you know, probably at least have one or two of those. I'm guessing most do. Some don't, depending on the size of your team, right? You know who everybody is. Or they're on a certain team. What we're seeing now is how do we expand on that attribute and start getting more into the skills matrix. Huge benefit when you could start looking at, you know, not only is this person a PM, but they're an intern, so maybe they're a level 2. You know, maybe this person's gone through on the PMI certification, they're a level 5. So starting to look at this, maybe what certifications have they had? You know, what training have they had? Some of our pharma companies have very unique skill sets that they're looking for. So that's critical. It all combines into, can we get done the work that we need to get done? We have people, we have all this projects going on. Do we have enough of the supply to deliver on the demand that we have coming in? I'm not sure if you have anything on this at all, Sean, you wanted to ask.
No, I mean, these are critical elements to building out a comprehensive resource pool to really address the needs of resource managers, the organization, when you're looking for people, when making requests or when not making requests. But, you know, fundamentally starting with a list of basic attributes should be pretty straightforward. It doesn't have to be perfect. I've had organizations ask us, what's the guidance for creating those attributes? And you kind of want to shake your head because, I mean, organizationally, you should at a high level understand fundamentally starting with kind of roles or groupings. How do you think about these people? And it can be something as simple as title or department or manager that may be used, and we see that quite a bit. But, you know, getting a bit deeper is helpful, but also it's something that's organic. These things are changing over time, and that's healthy. If the expectation is these things are going to be sticky and not change, that's not a very healthy perspective to start with, nor is it one to live with. So expect these things to change, but attribution is absolutely essential, especially if you're going back to the slide where I didn't contribute, apologies for that, but if you look at doing an early stage forecast where you're planning by roles and you don't know the named individuals, and that's a very common approach, which also plays a role in risk management and so on, but there has to be a correlation between your demand planning or generics and the resources that you intend to replace with. That's the only way you can draw your supply demand line. So that's critical to have those attributes. Skills play a broader role as well as you get into doing things like resource replacement, staffing assignments, because sometimes it goes well beyond just I need a power generation specialist or whatever. You might need to know, are they certified in this? Are they this level of certification in that? Do they have compliance here? It also plays a role in things like second order search. You know, it's a water driven project. Do they have water type experience? And then ultimately the capacity information, which pulls in, you know, how do you plan? What is your unencumbered carrying capacity by region, by location, by country? And then how do we chip away at that, looking at things from both a base capacity perspective and a net capacity perspective. And then there's some design considerations there, but these things all play a role both in the execution, the longer term forecasting, but fundamentally the supply demand balancing, which is really at the heart of all of this resource management stuff.
Well, and I guess from my point of view, you know, this is really complex stuff, guys, you know, because we are going into the area of merging systems, people and technology together. And as I said before, it is, of course, always the people who create complications. But what I like is the fact that it can be brought down to addressing complex challenges with simple tools. Before we move on, I'd just like to remind our delegates that we are going to be taking questions in about 5 minutes' time. I can see see a lot coming through already. So if you do have a question, please do pop it in the Q&A box as soon as you can, and we'll get to as many as we can in about 5 minutes. But before that, bringing this down to the nitty-gritty of how it looks in reality, I think the next 2 slides are really helpful, hopefully, for our delegates, because this one deals very much with your top tips, and then you're actually going to show us a little live example of how this works.
Yeah, you bet. And Sean touched on this, and I didn't leave it on this slide here, where, you know, he really was focusing on, you know, even if we're just identifying the generic roles to start, and then we're determining the quantity of what we're going to need, right? That's just that basic headcount FTE planning. You know, the other technique, which we talked about throughout the session, is not overloading people. You know, staff for productivity. Never try to put people on more than 2 assignments, because as we all, now again, I know some of you in the PMO are laughing at that because, you know, they've got you managing, you know, 15 projects or whatever it is. But, you know, in general, you know, there are some, you know, techniques to help that out. We talked about the task switching. We talked about, you know, even if we're looking at fixed teams, you still have to figure some fudge factor in, because we know their people are going to get pulled off. So what I wanted to show is that, you know, all these things we've talked about today are real world things. And in many cases, we're going to get asked questions all the time. You know, do we have enough people to deliver our work? Are we able to include this new project that we didn't have before? Are we able to, you know, do we have enough resources to complete the work that we want to complete? So one of the key things is, you know, do you have the ability to answer those questions fast? So I'm going to talk about this what if scenario planning. And really what the what if scenario planning lets us do is it's going to allow us to answer these questions in real time. Now, again, a lot of you might have really detailed Excel sheets to be able to build that information out. Some of you might be using some other tools. I'm going to just show you some live things here. And obviously, I should have logged in before this session, and I didn't. I apologize for that.
We'll forgive you. We'll forgive you, Greg. It's the joy of a live webinar.
Exactly. Oh, it's always something here. All right, so we'll pull it up. I may have you, Sean.
I'm not sure if it's helpful, Greg, but when I used to work for Microsoft, and it was many years ago, and Bill Gates was doing a presentation, he had someone behind the scenes with an analog switch to move between displays when something would crash. So
I miss those days.
You're in good company.
In a funny kind of way.
Yeah, there we go. All right, beautiful. So let's just say, for example, we have to answer these questions in real time, right? So now we want to be able to create what we call scenario plans or models. So, you know, we're going to let you create a lot of various scenarios or models that we might have. So I'll kind of open one up here. And so just imagine today in your environment, you have all this work coming into the pipeline, and you now need to be able to make decisions on whether you can complete that work or not. And I may have to, Sean, have you be prepped to pull yours up here?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg.
Just as a backup.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I've wore it out. Too many demos already this morning. Here we go. All right. So
we're all behind you, Greg. It's all good.
Exactly. So if you can imagine here, you know, you have all these projects, right? We talked about all this work coming in. Now, one of the things you got to look at is whether you're planning based on teams or roles or whatever, is do you have enough people available to do that work, right? So the first thing is, are we over allocated? If you have over allocated people, you're not going to be able to get the work done, and they're not going to be happy. So what we have to think about is, now that we've got that, how easy is it for you to say, all right, we have all this work going on. Now I got to make decisions on, do we move something out? And if we move it out, what's going to be the impact on our resources for moving that out? And in real time, being able to see the before allocation and the after, before and after. So critical to be able to have that. I've got all this work in my portfolio. I've got a finite set of resources. Can we deliver on this work up here? The other thing that I see a lot is you got all this new projects coming in the pipe, And you might want to ask, when could we start this? And there's no easy way to answer that other than now you could say, when can we start it? And we can give you real-time opportunities of when we could slot that work in. So think about that right away. I can give the business unit dates of when we can do it. They may come back and say, no, that's too late. I got to start it sooner. So then you could say, great, we could start it sooner. Let me go look here. Way back here, I don't have all the resources. I've only got 80% of them. But now, which one of these other projects would you like to move out? Or, hey, here's our gaps, right, on these people, or it very well could be roles. We need to know where our gaps are and we can move things around. Last thing I'll show you here before Q&A is, most people now are really looking at, I need a clear picture into my head count. So where am I going to be short head count? Or where do I have available head count based on role, department, location, country, internal resources versus external resources? We can't even get down to the name person if we want to see where maybe our gaps might be. So, but having the ability to visually see our resources against the work that we have, not necessarily down to the detailed tasks as we've talked about, but being able to see it at this level and do real-time what if this slips, what if this takes longer, what if we have to crash that schedule, show me the impact, all critical things that are highly important when we're trying to deliver on the work that we have.
Sure. I think it's really useful to see it kind of come to life and to see how you can make that instant what if planning and that instant scenario modeling, which you could presumably be doing in a sponsorship meeting or in an executive meeting if you really wanted to impress them. However, we are aware, of course, that Greg had a slight technical hitch there, so that has pushed time on a little bit, and I'm going to suggest for that reason, Greg, that perhaps we skip over the next slide and just move on just to speak for 30 seconds about what this is achieving for some of the big boys in the sector, because obviously they're setting an example for the others, and then we'll spend a few minutes taking questions before we close the session. So over to you.
Yeah, you bet. So all this stuff we've talked about really doesn't mean anything if somebody isn't getting benefit out of it, right? So as we all know, we hate to do things just to do them. So unless there's some kind of benefit, it's not worth it. Here's some live examples of various customers that are finding incredible ROI. So if we look at Deloitte here, this just shows, so imagine right now in your organization, if you could go and present and say, hey, look what we have done. We've literally been able to prove that we've got 55% more projects done. We've been able to increase by 30 to 50% the number of things we've been able to move through the pipeline. All super important things, but again, unless we've got the right tools purpose built for this resource capacity planning and what if, very difficult to do. Another live example, Sean, you've worked with these folks for at least 5 years, maybe 6, as well as I, but live case study here on Siemens. What's some experience you've seen with them?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to forecast well into the future and then use the what if analysis to identify how projects can be manipulated timing wise to see what can be done sooner rather than later. You can build out this optionality. I mean, Amy, earlier you talked about optionality that resources have increasingly due to COVID, work from home, and so on. Well, organizations achieve the same type of optionality capability through this real-time what if analysis. And another point that we didn't get to, I was hoping we'd get to, was sort of the planning cycle itself. So these folks had sort of reorganized and re-engineered their planning cycle to align more closely with this what if analysis capability. So what used to be something like an annual planning and annual reforecasting exercise became something that can be compressed and done much more frequently, and that lets the organization uncover additional options for delivery, additional options to achieve strategic objectives, or in this case, additional options to react to market demands and resource constraints. So I think this plays a role both in the process design and, of course, being able to get more work done sooner thanks to the help of a what if analysis platform.
And for anyone on this call, at the end, we'll give you our website, or email me or Sean or whoever, Amy. We have these more detailed case studies. We also have videos where these clients have presented. We've got white papers, lots of really good meat on all these case studies if you're interested in seeing about it. So I think with that, just to kind of keep it on time, I'm going to turn it back over to you right now, Amy, to kind of maybe walk through some Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, as I expected, a lot of the questions are quite practically focused. I can tell you now we won't get through all of them, but we'll take, I think, around about 5 minutes at the end of the session just to get through a few. Let's aim for a quick fire question session. Let's break the mold of these Q&As. I'm going to run through them and let's give the most practically based answers we can for our delegates, because I know that that's what our audience really appreciates, and that's a feature of this webinar today. So question one is to do with actually gathering data. How do we get started gathering this data to plan our resources? So my guess is that person's concerned with the kind of the startup of moving over to a resource portfolio management system like this. Essentially, where do you start?
I can take that. So Greg and I work together quite frequently on a lot of pre-sales activities. And clients generally are sending their data, and some of it is really frightening. I mean, you know, it is what it is, but odds are these things are sitting in spreadsheets across your organization, and they're most likely not in places you'd expect. So I would start to, number one, if you have any systems you put in previously, you can get potentially some resourcing information from those systems, at least a high-level overview of what does the pool consist of, number of resources. You'll likely find it's pretty stale, lots of probably termed resources and others that have been updated in a while. That's usually a starting point. You may be able to go to an HR organization or workforce planning group that may have some information. And earlier, Amy, you mentioned sort of the overlap between HRIS systems or workforce planning tools, IT PMO, product development. It's staggering how few of those systems contain anything of any value. So where I would generally go after that, and likely where these information exist, would be in various pockets in the organization of folks that are assembling these spreadsheets. One of the customers mentioned earlier in the case studies had gone out and had thousands of spreadsheets across the organization, and I think 3 separate PPM tools. And it took them time to just pull these things together and find where these were being hidden, because folks couldn't get what they needed out of these other tools. So start with the tools that are there today, as poor as the data quality may be. That's a starting point. I would then begin to navigate internally in the organization to find where those Excel spreadsheets exist. And those are the first 2 steps. From there, it gets a bit more creative. I hope that's helpful.
Certainly it's helpful for me. I hope it's been helpful for the delegate who asked that question. Here's another one for you. This is an interesting one, actually. I was interviewing someone about this just yesterday. Can I use this kind of planning model to manage external resources in the supply chain? Now, that's always getting into a tricky area, isn't it? Greg?
So I'll give one live example, and then Sean, you can throw some more. So absolutely. I mean, I will tell you one just recently. Again, a large engineering organization where they do a lot of global projects. They have so much work that they're hiring contractors all over the globe, right? It's a standard thing in their business. They always hire contractors. But their challenge was they had to hire way more than they thought than they actually needed, because they didn't know what their internal employees' skills were. They didn't know what their internal employees' availability was, because they had no system in place to be able to actually look at what they were working on or what skills they had. So they were hiring more, it was costing them more money, they were losing money on their jobs when really they probably could have used some internal. So absolutely, we see many clients using it for external, and I know Sean's got some examples probably in the software development, semiconductor, and so on space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first question to ask is, do you really need to track and manage that from a supply-demand standpoint, or is it purely the financials related to it? So I think there's 2 possible paths. One path is the external resources are really just a dollar value, and it's more of a financial tracking, planning, and management decision versus a resource forecasting side. So that's the first question to ask. And if it is driven by the financials, you know, our product allows that support. You know, others do as well, of course. So that's one approach to take. If there are resources you are going to manage and they are going to be considered part of the supply demand equation, so they could be staff aug, they might be backfill resources, maybe you deal with a lot of contractors and so on, it's number one, getting them added to the system is pretty straightforward. It's additional attribution is going to be required because you would want to understand supply demand analysis, supply lines, and so on based on, this is pretty simple stuff, internal, external. So you need to know what is your supply line and capacity with internal headcount, FTE or W2 here in the US, versus what is my staff aug level, because those might be the first ones to get cut in budget reduction. So being able to pivot between the two when doing analytics is really important. That also plays a role in that risk mitigation stuff I mentioned earlier. So you can follow that, whichever path is required. In terms of managing their level of effort, well, firstly, you have to consider their capacity information. Are they dedicated to your organization? Are they playing a partial role? Are they more of truly a contracting firm that you're working with, and they're kind of managing their availability? And then the actual forecast is your traditional forecasting activity. That's where your creativity and knowledge as planners, business analysts, schedulers, portfolio managers comes into play around what's actually needed. So there's a few different paths depending upon what's needed, and then a few concrete steps, I think, to get that in place.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for one more and then possibly a very quick one. We have a delegate who would like to know about BAU versus transformation. So are there any differences, I'm paraphrasing, in this approach to resource planning, depending on whether you're working on a transformation portfolio or just a BAU scenario?
You want me to grab this one, Greg?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right, cool. Yeah, so this is another yeah, of course, this is a pretty common one as well, and there might be a third and fourth category, and a lot of managers, for some reason, and businesses want to see that breakout of how much work is spent. Keep the lights on, business as usual, transformative, innovative, billable, non-billable. So it comes down to, again, attribution on both your project and assignment work to know, is the work related to those areas? That way we can gauge at the assignment level what is the quantity of work that is BAU, the quantity of work that's transformative. It doesn't really change the mix of data on the resource supply side. You can, however, and some organizations will do this as well, I mentioned earlier, there's a base capacity, so that unencumbered headcount, I have 8 hours a day for the company. Whether someone works at it or not is a different topic. But am I only going to forecast and track how much of the effort is related to non-BAU, non-keep the lights on activities, in which case you could take the approach of just driving things from a net capacity standpoint and assuming the BAU work is really not forecast. So we take that away from our resource supply side and say that instead of 8 hours a day, there's 4 hours a day, because half of their capacity is keep the lights on, business as usual, and everything else we're going to track is exclusively going to be transformation or innovative work. So that's another approach. In either case, though, when looking at like what if analysis, I think it is useful to know what the BAU projects and activities are, because there might be opportunities and sort of what if analysis to exclude various activities. You might be able to slot in more BAU activities just based on the timing and dependencies between the transformational work. So I definitely think building out basic project attribution, activity attribution to know what is considered BAU, what is considered transformative, and then have a product like ours that can give you insight into how much time is being spent in each spot, and what are the targets? Are you hitting the percentage that's transformative versus the percentage that's BAU? So those are a couple different options. I'm happy to cover that in more detail offline.
Sure. And we've got time, I think, for just one more, which is a very quick practical question. What kind of architecture would we need to get going with this? Greg, Sean, are we talking a cloud-based 365 type scenario, or are people looking into heavier investment?
Yeah, it's absolutely a cloud scenario. We run in Microsoft Azure, so depending on where you are in the globe, the Azure environment will be in the country that you're located. So if you're in the UK, it's set up there. 100% browser-based, very thin client, supports most of the browsers that are out there. Nothing needs to be installed locally at all. And again, we have clients where, they may have 25 people on the team, all the way up to clients that have 80,000 global resources. So it is a cloud solution. Now, some of you, if you do have to have it on premise, we've got a couple of top secret secure clients that need to have it on premise. And hopefully, I won't be arrested for just saying that. I'm kidding. So, you can do that, but generally it's cloud-based, very lightweight. We offer free trials, So we're happy to give you a free trial where you can you put your data in it. We can even get your data in Excel, or we have demo data, and we can also just set up demos if you'd like. I'm happy to work with you and go through that.
Okay, great. I think that officially declares us out of time, and we of course have the lovely obligatory final slide with I think a lovely message actually on it, and a very, very relevant one to the environment we're working in today. All that remains is really for me to just remind all of our delegates that Greg and Sean are available for further debate and discussion. All three of us would love to hear from you if you'd like to connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd be delighted to answer your questions. I'm just thinking, Greg and Sean, that once the webinar's over, it might be a very nice touch if we were to email all delegates a copy of the article that we ran as well with PM Today recently, which can also be found on our website. But most importantly, don't forget that if you would like to pursue the conversation with Greg and Sean, you can connect with them on LinkedIn, or you can of course go to ProSymmetry.com, where you can access a whole host of resources, contact the guys, organize a free demo, as Greg says, with your live data, and really pursue the conversation in any way you like. It's been fantastic having you all here. Greg, Sean, thank you so much. We'll let you get back to your sunbathing on the beach now, having called you out of that. It really has been a lot of fun talking to you about this, and to our delegates as well. Thank you for taking the time out of your day from all over the world to join us today. That really is all we've got time for. So I'm going to close this webinar now and say I hope everyone found it a really productive session. Bye-bye and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.